Hey, what's good, everybody? My name's Alchemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about bass design, but less so about how to make stuff specific and more so about what makes what talk. How to get vowels, how to get things to do what you want it to. This is an elusive, I guess, topic that I've seen done in other ways. And in fact, I have this patch that I've recreated from, some of the other big YouTubers like AU5 and all of them. And then I'll show you my version of things that I do that I've been doing for almost a decade now that kind of like have very close similarities or like a universal concept, but is so specific and so finely tuned that will lead you down different roads. And also, I kind of want to talk about some of the struggles about why I couldn't pull this stuff off in the past, where it's just so much easier now. So if that seems interesting, yeah, join the channel, subscribe, like the video, leave some of your own tips in the comments if you want. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what constitutes making something talk. And for me, I feel, and what I love most about basses like this is that there's a humanistic quality to them. It almost sounds like there is, or maybe not even humanistic, but something that represents a creature or something that represents an entity that is given speech, something of the sort, vocalization. The reason why I like these basses so much is because they relate to a lot of phrasings and a lot of expressions that, for me, say a lot of things that I personally can't say with words or describe with emotion, I guess, if you will. And that's kind of how I got into this stuff in the first place. There's a lot of different facets about like what a talking bass is, and I'm going to show you a few different examples. This one specifically is from AU5's tutorial. I just kind of followed it along and picked up on it and then did some of my own stuff, and it sounds like this. That reminds me a lot of like, that whole Skrillex thing. That one is the hyper chorus. Then I've got some sounds kind of like this. And then I have some other stuff that I made earlier, kind of, well, this is from the same patch, but then we have this one. Could use some OTT, but I threw this together pretty quickly. But as you can hear, there's lots of different, low type sounds that we can utilize to, serve as a phrase, which to me, this stuff works best as fills as opposed to like your main riffs, but that's another conversation for another day. So let's talk about what makes them talk. The first thing that I want to kind of open up with, especially with something like this, is that turning off all of these effects, the talking aspect of it is actually going to be relatively the same. So if I were to turn all of these off and we look at the main component here, it's going to be much more quiet. But take a look at what's going on with this. And so without any of the other effects, a moving waveform, something that is relatively transformative, can kind of be like the catalyst to get you where you want to go, and sometimes might even be all you need minus some distortion or something. The thing is that whenever we're talking about what makes something speak, I'm trying to use like different language here so that way it doesn't sound super redundant. Really, you need movement at the end of the day. It needs to be something that has a clear change in tonality that is more so about change of timbre and less so about change of space. I think that's the best way that I can describe it. Even going from something like a sine wave all the way through a pulse, like if you think about it and you listen to this a little bit, it almost sounds like going from a triangle to a saw wave says wow, right? So yeah, now that's going to be stuck in your head and my head for the rest of the day, but it's going wow. So if we kind of take that into consideration and we were to develop something that has multiple changes over time, which I'll do here in just a second, then there's a lot of different, I guess, things that you can formulate with being a little bit aware of what you can do within a wavetable. The first thing that I want to mention is that if you're doing bass, this needs to be the highest, I guess, the most prominent harmonic. And when we talk about harmonics, it's basically harmonics is everything that makes up a sound. A single harmonic pretty much makes a sine wave, and then I don't really know what constitutes a noise thing, but for the most part, I will say that a noise has every single frequency filled up from 0 to 50K or something. So it's important to mention that harmonics do not equal frequency, but they are related very closely. And that's another conversation for another day. But for now, let's just pretend like this is the first harmonic, this is our sub, and then everything else after that is going to create kind of more higher pitch sounds. So actually, let me go ahead and demonstrate that. If I were to just have a single harmonic like this, and we go here, you'll hear that that's kind of a sub. If you're on a phone, you won't hear that. But if I were to add something like this, now, even though it's the same pitch and we still have that low, it's going to sound like it has a little bit more. Now, the interesting thing is, at least for these three, which are very important, if I were to take just the second harmonic, this is actually going to be 12 semitones, or rather an octave, higher than the first harmonic. And that's why these are related to frequency and pitch and stuff, but not necessarily, because this is more so of a culmination that creates a single sound rather than something that is going to fill out your entire frequency range. And it's all based off of ratios. So this is an octave, this is an octave and a fifth, and then I don't know, I don't remember if it's like a 1 point something ratio, but everything after that has a set defined ratio of based off of the first harmonic, which is really interesting, and you can look up more stuff about that later. So in practicality sense, because all of that was kind of just jargon, if I were to do something like this, we have a complex waveform. Now, if I were to change that waveform somewhere in between to where it's a dramatic change, kind of like this, let me come over here because I need this guy. Take a listen. So within this, that's okay. It's not my first choice, but if I were to create a different shape now, let's see what happens if I morph in between this. And so you can see that while it's not necessarily like super vocal or something of the sort, it is still leading into something that kind of is sounding a little bit more like somebody is phrasing it, as opposed to just the wow sound that we heard from earlier. And so if we take some of this into account and maybe make this kind of dramatic, kind of like so, then now between all of these, which what I did, by the way, was instead of highlight all of this and create something, in order to get this to automatically go, just pick one waveform, then click somewhere else, change the waveform, click somewhere else, change the waveform, click somewhere else, change the waveform. And that's how we got that. But you can hear through this that we're already kind of getting a sound that is reminiscent of what we're going for. And I wanted to talk about wavetables first, because this is one of the fastest and easiest ways to do this. And I don't sit here and do this like as slow as I did. I usually just go womp and then create another thing and go womp, and it usually works out pretty okay. But I mean, if we were to add just a little bit of distortion to this, then the accent should be a little bit more prominent. And look, we haven't even done anything else. So before you do anything, if you have Serum or you have Vital and all that, like just getting really comfortable with making wavetables can do so much for you. And it's not about the growl bass per se, but it is just kind of understanding what is happening here with these changes in harmonics that give that effect or that phenomenon, if that makes sense. So this isn't about dubstep. This isn't about, neuro stuff. It's just about, hey, what makes a bass kind of speak out. That being said, if you don't have access for whatever reason to a wavetable, then you can still get really interesting stuff by changing and formulating different stuff via FM or phase modulation as well. They're not the same thing, but they kind of lead to the same result. So even just changing something kind of like this over time with, say, an envelope. So what I'll do is I am sending this oscillator to here, and that is going to affect the sound kind of like so. So let me go ahead and back off of the distortion a bit. And what I'm going to do is maybe make this a little bit more prominent and see if I can get this to kind of change over time. So we've already created a movement, and now all we kind of really need to do is, I don't know why that's stuck on there, but okay, is kind of do some more stuff to where this is going to change with this as well. So if I were to maybe do something like this and create another envelope, kind of like so, I kind of like that. You can kind of already hear that it's kind of doing a similar thing now towards going wow, right? Especially when those upper harmonics kind of come into play. If we were to just use sine waves, then it becomes a little bit easier to kind of hear it morphing rather than that hard bite. But sometimes I like to mess with this stuff just to kind of hear what it's going to sound like in between these simple waveforms, because as you can see, they lead to very different results. Now, this kind of goes into the next piece with this. If you have something that's harmonically rich but isn't necessarily phrasing anything, that's where we get into the next big piece of this, which is filtering. Filtering can be as complex or as simple as you want it to be, but it's more about understanding what frequency range is doing what, as opposed to what you should do. So let me explain. The most simple thing to do, which whenever we talk about this, is using a bandpass filter, actually even a low pass filter, because this is going to maintain functionality. So if I were to do something kind of like this, where this envelope is opening and closing, then you can kind of hear that it's already kind of making that, funny wow sound. If we were to kind of use a band pass, then this is going to be even more accentuated because now we're cutting out the lows. And by utilizing something like that, maybe even something that is both a band pass and say something like a notch, to where these are going to be pit up against each other. So this will go down, this will go up. Then right here, this interaction in between these two is a little bit more apparent. And that gets into understanding the interaction between filters and stuff in the first place. Now you'll notice that I use this gigantic drive here to help pull some of this stuff back, and that's because we're doing so much cutting. We're literally taking whatever all this had and confining it into a bandpass kind of like this, and saying, okay, we're only going to let whatever's on the inside through, and then we're going to cut it again, right? And that means that it's, when this passes into itself, there's going to be an even more linear passage of what frequency ranges are able to kind of come through. And this is important because, if I'm going to say something like, whoa, like my actual voice or my mouth didn't open very high, but it's very prominent of how that's being expressed. So if we kind of take this into consideration, then whenever you're doing filtering and stuff, for one, depending on what it is that you're trying to make, like, have fun, go crazy. If you wanted to make something that's a little bit more like nasally, perhaps, then maybe we can focus on pulling off the low end and focusing on creating a gap here that goes downward. You see, I don't really like sounds like that personally. It's not really my thing, but it is important to explain, because if you're going to teach something, you need to teach everything. And sometimes when people are trying to work with something, I guess, actually, hold on, let me see here. Something that I know that a lot of people are into is that typical like tipper sound, right? And so if you have something, I'm just going to use a random one here to kind of paint this picture, but say a few different high notch filters kind of like this, and you have these placed in different different frequency ranges, and you have these kind of interact with each other. Maybe make this a little bit faster. can hear that while it doesn't sound like it's talking much, to be honest, it is very nasally because we're taking out so much of this. The thing with it is that um, filtering can do so much for whatever sound you have, provided that you have the harmonics for it. And with that kind of takeaway, there are a lot of other effects that we can get into. Put this on hold for a second because I want to talk a little bit more about filtering, but then we'll come back to this example and discuss some of the other like spatial effects that you can utilize. But for now, let's say that we keep this kind of thing going. This is just the beginning, and I wanted to show you with these filters first because if you have faceplant, then I already know that you'll be able to use it. But something else that is of great significance and something that I do is actually use an EQ. If I were to play this, right, obviously that's extremely loud. Let me turn this down a sec because we don't actually need that much. There we go. Something that we can utilize is kind of looking at what our sound with movement is already doing and try to play into creating a more prominent vowel by doing something kind of like this. Now, one thing that I wish that faceplant did is scale this all the way to 30 dB, because this is going to kind of help make this stuff a little bit more prominent, which if you're doing this, by the way, be very careful. Like start with low stuff. Meaning that you're not going to do something like this and create huge spikes. You kind of want to be gentle with it, especially in this region here. That's just kind of like a safety warning / disclaimer. I warned you. So do that at your own risk. But if we do something kind of like this, and it doesn't really matter where per se, I guess it does matter where, but just as long as it's somewhere in the middle, this will actually create a vowel. And this can change. You can do stuff by either modulating each one of these individually. You can start by moving all of them together, or you can do something that I've been doing lately, which is just this, just because I find one vowel that I generally like. So, and usually that's enough for me. And so if I create something like that, where I pull the mix up, that's pretty cool. Now maybe what I can do is stack that with one more filter here with maybe that notch and pull that back towards the low mids here, and let's see what that sounds like. So that actually sounds pretty cool, but because we still have all the high end in there, it might benefit us to kind of go back to that low pass filter. And that's kind of the key to this, is like no matter what you do, you generally need to have one of these because it's just going to make this so much more dramatic. And as you can hear, you know, it's starting to get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. I mean, one thing that we could also do in case if you're kind of just looking for the 0 to hero version is either use a detuned saw wave that sounds kind of like this. For some reason, just detuned saw waves have a much more, I don't know, a much more emphasized sound. You can also do detuned sounds that actually have more stacks but less detuning. Yeah, you see that's that's actually a lot more dramatic. And what I'll do here is turn this off. There we go. Maybe make this a little bit thicker. And now we kind of have a roar. And what I can do is turn off the resonance on this because there's that high end sound. And now that's a lot more dramatic. Personally, I think just leaving the EQ positioning where it is and using the mix sounds the best to me. in this particular case. Now, obviously, this sound is kind of muffled, and that's where these things kind of like OTT come into play, to where you can have a multi-band compressor that is doing both downward and upwards compression. You can kind of look into that or just use a preset or whatever. I actually have this preset available in the Discord in free stuff. You just kind of have to go fish for it. But what this will do is kind of bring back some of that high end. And as you can hear, it's starting to kind of take shape a little bit better. Okay, we cooked it a little bit too hard, but actually this is a great point to talk about something. The reason why this is muffled now is because the low end of this is too much. And so by backing off of this just a little bit, look at how much more clear that's become again. So let's go ahead and build off of this sound, because there's a lot that we can do with it. And this is where I kind of want to start talking about other aspects of movement. And there's so many different ways again, but one big key thing that I enjoy using a lot is actually all of these, a chorus, a phaser, and a comb filter, respectively. I want to start with the phaser first, because this is something that you can kind of just immediately apply. But if we turn the rate all the way down, which depending on what sound you're using or whatever, there's going to be different stuff. We can actually play with a cutoff on this in order to help kind of emphasize some of the other pieces of movement that we have. And that's really the key to this, is we need to create an interaction, and then we need to build our effects based off of those interactions. And to be honest with you, all of this comes into like fine baking, I think is the best way to explain this. But as you practice, you're going to be playing Goldilocks with it. This is too hot. This is too cold. This is just right. And for me, I've done this so many times that I've kind of usually know the fast way of where to go. But if we kind of play with the cutoff here and we kind of keep this somewhere in the low mids, then that's actually going to help us with emphasizing whatever's going on here. So we went too high that time, and now I'm just going to back off of it a little bit more. And not every time, because this still has a rate, but I don't know if you heard that last one. Actually, I have that, which is a good point to talk about with certain things. Certain timings, especially with things that are free running, are going to make a huge difference with how something sounds. So in this particular case, because the phaser doesn't have a complete stop on it, it doesn't have a complete stop on this, it only goes down to 0.05. That means that every time I hit the button or the key, that there's going to be different points of where the phase is going to start, right? So if you listen to this one, it sounds very lasery, but then when we hit this one, that one had just the right kind of phase positioning on it to where it sounded good. This is important because if you're using a different kind of phaser, or you're using a flanger or something and it doesn't sound the same, a lot of times it's not that you're using it wrong, it's that there's just a different interaction that you're creating. And you kind of have to be aware of what this is doing to the sound, and just be patient with it and sit with it a little bit and try to work on, finding what sounds good to you. Maybe perhaps even changing the depth can give us something. I think that already sounds pretty good, to be honest. And really, if we wanted to, we could, call this patch a day. But let's talk about some of the other stuff, for example, with the chorus. Now, some of you may have seen AU5's tutorial and been like, oh, chorus, I'm going to hyperchorus this and do it. No, it doesn't quite work that way. And sometimes you kind of have to understand that you're going to try to take something from one synth and apply it to another. And I'd say like 90% of that stuff applies. But there are certain use cases of where it does not, or you have to think about it a little bit different, which I'll explain towards the end of the video here in a bit. Give me just 1 second. So within that, playing within the spread here and the delay, you don't actually have to do much with this one. But if we turn the spread down, maybe adjust the rate. then that kind of gives it a little bit more of that thicker sound, so to speak. But one thing that you want to be careful with on this is like also keep in mind that I'm doing this over the entire sound and not splitting this into frequencies and blah, blah, blah. But that's not really that important while we're just talking from a pure design standpoint. But you can hear that it kind of helps characterize it and helps it sound like it's a little bit thicker. And then perhaps kind of finding a middle ground in between that can help. This is not going to get you the timbre and the movement. What it's going to do is help you enhance the movement. Does that kind of make sense? And that's the whole point of using spatial effects and chorus flanger, all that stuff in the first place. This isn't really for, how do I say, like anything vocal, but this is just one of those classic sounds that I would feel criminal not showing you. But if you were to take a comb filter and kind of scrape up and down like this in this mid frequency range, then that's how you'll get that cool flanging effect. This is kind of characterized more prominently through the mids if we were to use like a multi-pass, something of the sort. And let's go ahead and put this on here. You'll actually see that I have this on here for this purpose. Sorry, I didn't mean to use the flanger with the comb filter. But perhaps if we isolate this, it'll be a little bit more prominent. Yeah, it's kind of there, but not super apparent. When it's soloed, you can definitely hear it though. And so I guess if you have a classic Reese, that's just 2 detuned saw waves and you have that playing, then that's how you'll get that jet flange. I always thought that it was through a phaser. It's actually not. It's through a comb filter. You can always create a custom comb filter as well in the same way that we did this. Like you can just add a bunch of points and dips and stuff and create interesting, resonances and stuff. But that's kind of really what the theme of what today is with what we're playing with. But really in between all of these things, that's generally speaking how I usually try to shape vowels and tonalities and stuff with that. Now when it comes into translation and all that, I think that one really important thing with this, say something like this sound, let me turn everything back on. As I had demonstrated from before, I believe, this it's kind of silly. I feel like something else is not on in that though, but really what's happening here between this is really just a saw wave, and it's being modulated through a bend plus. If you remember anything of the likes of Massive, that's what we were missing here. As you'll see, I have a lot of the same tricks through this with notches, comb filter, right? So a lot of the same things, a lot of the same tricks. Yeah, that's a big difference with that. Really what's happening within this waveform, even though it's the, the hyper growl or whatever, where we're doing resampling and whatever, we're actually mostly doing bend, minus, and plussing to where this wavetable is being either expanded or contracted. So even though, let's say you watch that AU5 tutorial or whatever, and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to, take a saw wave and then send it through the hyper dimension and then resample that to the wavetable and all that other stuff. Understanding that within a wavetable of creating something like this in the first place can sometimes lead you down a very similar result. So for example, if I have this sound right here and we utilize something that is a similar process, which you might have to do a couple of times, the modulators here have a bend soft, bend linear, and then a bend soft, which we'll use this one, and we just apply this FM here. Take a listen. Let me go ahead and turn off all these effects. Now this is going to be more dependent on obviously what this sounds like, but as you can see, this is extremely vocal already. And so perhaps if we were to even use this on, you know, a funky saw wave or whatever, then perhaps this will give us something that will kind of lead us closer to what I'm looking for. Perhaps not. So we do need something that is a little bit more formant, and I think that's the best way to kind of describe what we're doing anyways. But once you have that formant, then kind of playing with that bend plus and minus, which, by the way, these modulators are, in some case or another, morphs or warping, as you would do in Serum. Then once we kind of apply that to this and we throw this back through all of the other stuff that we've created, then you can hear that we're already still, or that we're still rather creating a lot of vocal movement that kind of helps us define what we're trying to shape. I will mention a couple of like outliers here. For example, there is the formant filter, but I don't like this personally because it's a little bit too cheesy. So if I were to turn off all of this other stuff, like you can, I guess, and like wow filter and all that stuff from like Sugar Bites and all that, like, yeah, you kind of can get something like this. But typically speaking, every formant filter that I've ever used sounds like this. And I'm not really down for that. It just doesn't sound all that interesting. However, one alternative that you can use is if you have something like Vital, there are formant filters in here that, rather than try to use this from the cutoff, kind of like, where is this? The cutoff kind of like this. If you mess with the mix and you kind of do a similar thing like this is actually some presets that you can utilize with all of these different formats. I guess there's only a few, but this will definitely kind of play a role in getting you some of those cool sounds that I was just doing, for sure. So in general, if we kind of take a look at some of these examples, you'll notice that there are these patterns of these different things that I utilize across the board. So there's this sound. That. There's this sound, which I wouldn't say that's super formant, but it does have those really cool moments and those movements here, as you'll see. But as you can see, I'm using FN, I'm using, you know, bandpass filters. There's some other kind of cool coloring tricks that I'm doing on that one specifically, but if we look at the Robert, or the default thing that I made now, this one's just a square wave and a bandpass, and here's our slice EQ here. And that's kind of giving us that really cool sound that, you know, I have come to love, whether it be for the case of, you know, something in the sense of dubstep or something in the sense of neuro. So there's a lot of other stuff that we could talk about, but I think that I've covered quite a bit of information. If you want more, I have a bunch of free classes on YouTube, Comprehensive Guide to Neurobass, all that other stuff. I also do have masterclasses that go deeper into bass design and drum design and production and all that other stuff. But if you can, leave a like and let me know what questions or comments or observations you all have within this. And hopefully this kind of helped you all out with, you know, just how to make cool basses and stuff. And yeah, check out those masterclasses. If you just want these presets and whatnot, I've got them available at alchemy.com. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.